sitting down tonight and I look back on my day, what do I want to be the bright spot? And it might be, I want to just get, 500 words of the first, chapter of my new book, if you're writing it, right? It might be, I actually want to spend my energy and effort today planning some big family trip that I'm taking later this year, and that will leave me feeling good. But I think focusing yourself and having, the intention and the purpose of one thing is amazing, because at the end of the day, if everything else goes to shit, if you do have that thing that you really invested your energy and attention into, it feels really good. And if you just apply that day after day, whether it's a professional project, something in your work, in your career, and you're like, every day I'm going to put an hour, 90 minutes towards the book, or I'm going to put an hour to 90 minutes towards, this new career path I'm trying to work my way into, this new job. Or if it's something personal, I think you can just get such value out of having that intention and focus. So
hello and welcome to another episode of the Lifehack Show, a series of interviews with exciting people who have built successful careers and businesses by taking action and getting more out of each day, something we firmly believe in here at Lifehack. My name is Carl Pauline and I'm your host for this show. Today's guest is Connor Swenson. Connor runs an education company called Forgewell with his wife, Claire, that helps businesses transform their culture and achieve greater performance, engagement, and well-being across their workforce. He is a certified teacher of Make Time, Search Inside Yourself, and Adaptive Resilience, and he has taught these programs to the likes of Google, YouTube, L'Oreal, Klarna, and many other leading businesses. Thank you, Connor, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about your productivity journey and how you became interested in the subject?
For sure. So I began my working career at Google in New York City way back when. And I kind of came into Google, I say sort of it through the back door, very non-traditional hiring path. I got hired through this sort of volunteer program I was doing in uni in New Orleans. And so when I arrived, I felt like I was surrounded by these very brilliant and ambitious people who seemed way smarter than I was. They had very fancy pedigrees from Stanford and the Harvard MBAs. And so I felt this imposter syndrome a little bit about if I belonged at Google. And I think that is the first kind of step I took into the world of productivity, because I was asking myself, how am I going to compete and perform and stand out here? And so I sort of delved into a lot of time management and productivity advice, and I got really efficient, really organized, really on top of my life, it felt. But I started to have this sort of gnawing sense after a couple of years that I was getting really, really good at just reacting to the world around me. And Google is an easy place to do that because there's just so much inbound, emails and messages and meetings. And I got really good at replying and responding and reacting, but I felt like I wasn't kind of living up to what my potential could be, or I wasn't spending time on the things that really matter. And so I moved from New York to San Francisco, and I was looking for some different ways to approach my life. And I met the authors of the book Make Time, Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky, and before the book, but they were kind of experimenting with some new ideas and new ways of approaching their days. And I took some of those ideas, I started putting them into play in my own life, started slowing down a little bit, having a bit more intentionality, a bit more purpose. Around that same time, I started to delve a little bit deeper into some sort of spiritual work, and all of that kind of came with me as I moved to London in 2016. And I sort of had a totally new way of looking at my days. And I think a lot of the old productivity and time management advice, I saw the value in it, but I really appreciated what became the Make Time framework from Jake and John. Changed my journey and trajectory at Google, led to some great promotions, amazing job opportunities there. And I was running a partnerships team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Google. But I really wanted to share what I was learning. I was meeting people all over. They were having the same challenges that I was. People were super busy. They were stressed out. People were burning out. And so I left Google 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, to help share what I had been doing myself. Sort of these simple practices for focus and productivity.
So at Google, because as you mentioned, Google, in my imagination, is always a really fast-paced company, like I suppose I'm just reading a book at the moment. I think it's called How Apple Lost Its Soul. And it's, I don't know how much truth, I'm always skeptical on these kind of, but one of the things that struck me as I'm reading the book is that the incredible speed and pace that things are happening inside the company, things that, you know, as an iPhone user, I don't recognize. I just have an iPhone that I keep quiet most of the day. But what's going on inside that company is like a hive of activity. And you mentioned there that you learned that you needed to slow down. How do you slow down in a company where I don't mean to be like, I wouldn't want to be insulting to anyone working at Google or Apple, but it seems like worker ants just getting on with their work and as fast as they can. But how do you stand out and slow down in that kind of environment?
Yeah.
Stand out in a positive way, because I can imagine slowing down, you could stand out in a negative way, but slowing down and making that a positive move.
Yeah. What you said, what comes to mind is this phrase that Cal Newport has been talking about, this sort of hyperactive hive mind, which I think is an apt description of the culture in many sort of progressive and modern work organizations like Google, where it's just like frenetic activity all of the time. And I think a lot of it comes down to our defaults. And this is a concept that we really dive deep into with Make Time. And by defaults, I mean just like, what are the normal ways that things operate? Like before you customize and configure something to your needs, like that's the default. And, you know, your phone comes with a bunch of defaults when you buy it, but also a workplace like Google comes with a lot of defaults. And so the defaults for many people is, you know, they get to work and, you know, from the second they start work to the end of work, they have, you know, chat messages coming in nonstop. They're replying to emails while they're in meetings, you know, they're in back-to-back meetings, and they try to kind of fit their most important work in around the edges. I was doing the same thing, right? I think we become addicted to it. Like you get a little bit addicted to the speed. And sometimes it's really fun and fulfilling, and you're on a project with a really clear goal and you have a great team, and it's just like you're sprinting towards it. But I think we lose something when we're kind of constantly in that state. So for me, it was just about changing some of those defaults. And so, you know, a simple thing I started to do was before I would open up my email inbox and my chat messages, and before I would look at that sort of, because as soon as that Pandora's box was open, it's like, it's hard to resist. I would just skip that morning check-in, and I would start my day with, you know, an hour and a half, you know, depends how busy the day is, of, you know, some quiet, focused work on something that was important to me, not something that was kind of screaming urgent, but something that I knew was valuable for the team, was meaningful to me. And this is this idea that we talk about called kind of the daily highlight, like picking one thing that's going to be important to you and changing the default of starting the day kind of on the back foot. So it's certainly not an easy thing to do. I think you're swimming upstream in many cultures, but I find, you know, even in a place like Google, you spend an hour and a half a day of really focused work on something important to you. You make a lot of progress. It feels good. People start to notice. And so then you get this sort of fulfilling, it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it definitely is a reinforcing habit where it's like you start to see the benefits of doing that. You feel better at the end of the day. But yeah, these were the early days when you were just able to kind of put away messages onto Gchat. Now there's a lot more customization and these sort of tools that I think are really important to like share with your team. I just saw on Google Calendar just earlier this year, if you type in something like focus into the name of your calendar event, or, you know, make time for writing, there's a focus mode. So you can actually start to signal these things. So I think the workplace and the tools are catching up and allowing, you know, people to start to say, okay, you know, when is Carl going to be in focus mode? When do I know not to interrupt you? And then, you know, I think those things are the small practices that can make a huge difference. And, you know, you slow down at first, but you speed up in the long term.
I think that means we're going to have to retrain the managers. Managers have a bad, people I work with, managers don't respect your focus block times. I keep getting that back from my clients. Once we set, you know, a focus block time up. But my manager will, if I don't respond to the email in 5 minutes, or I don't respond to the chat message in 2 minutes, they're knocking on the door or heading towards my desk, and I go, okay, let's we have to kind of reset things here. But actually, one of the things I do is I usually say you have to educate your boss. And I got a classic story happened to me when I first came to Korea. I was obviously not aware of Korean culture or even Asian culture really at that stage. And the chairman of our company, for some reason, took a liking to me. And he called me one Saturday morning. And I looked at the phone. And I thought, I'm not answering that. I'm coming from the UK. And back in the early 2000s, we did not answer the phone to work on a weekend. And I ignored it. And I called him back on Monday morning and just said, I'm sorry, I didn't have my phone with me. And he sounded a bit put out. He sounded not angry or upset, but he just kind of sounded like really surprised that I didn't answer the phone when he called me. And I asked one of my Korean colleagues, I says, you know, he called me on Saturday, I didn't answer the phone. Oh, you didn't answer the phone? And I was going, yeah. But what actually happened was I accidentally trained my chairman of our company, then my big boss, and just simply by a pure accident and ignorance. But he never called me on a weekend again. If he needed me, he'd call me on a Friday or he'd call me on a Monday, but he would never call me on a weekend again. He kind of got the message I wasn't going to answer the phone on a weekend. Since then he's become my Korean father, and he's a really, really good friend of mine. I don't work with his company anymore, but we often talk about that. And he said, yeah, it was a bit of a shock. But one of the things I learned from that was you can train your superiors to your way of working as long as you are getting the results. Obviously, if you don't get the results, they're not going to accept your way of working. But it's true, you can train your boss and your superiors.
Exactly. And this, again, it all comes back to these defaults. And like the default in today's world is everyone's always online. They're always reachable. Everything can happen just like this. And you know, to have that sort of moment where you say, actually, you know, I'm not going to pick up my phone on the weekend. And if you call and if it's a huge emergency, then, you know, then maybe you just text me, hey, I really need to talk to you. Okay, fine. Like you can change some of these behaviors. But I think we just all there's the environments that we live in shape us in such profound ways. And, you know, the managers, you know, that we train, it's the same thing as they feel the pressure from their manager. And so they pass on this sort of behaviors. But I think you're right. It's when you start to see the results of working in a different way, then that's what I saw at Google. I wasn't teaching or training or sharing anything. I just got great results. And then I had my teammates asking me, wait, what are you doing? Because you don't seem like stressed and frazzled. You actually seem to be getting a lot done. You seem like you're doing quite well. And then people are asking. So oftentimes, you know, I do encourage people too. It's like, it's better to walk the walk and show people, and then that conversation becomes much more open. And also it's like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like you can just agree with your team, like let's protect 1 hour. If it's crazy 24/7, let's just protect 1 hour a day where together we agree that we can step away from it. You can do that and have tremendous results. And then the rest of the day, you can be back in the hyperactive hive mind on Slack and in meetings and whatever. So it's not an all or nothing. I think for some people, it feels so, they think, oh, I'll never be able to reach you, or I'll never be able to interrupt you. And you say, oh no, it's okay. Like, let's find what works. And certain cultures, it's a different story.
I mean, one of the things I found is really helpful, and I kind of teach this to people, is narrow down your communication channels. Like you're not going to be able to get rid of all your communication channels, but it's so easy. Like when I've spoken at conferences, they say, this is our WhatsApp. Can you be on WhatsApp so we can communicate with you? And then I've got people saying, I think it's Telegram. Can you be on Telegram so we can communicate with you? And then I've got, obviously in Korea, we have something called Kakao Talk, which is their version of WhatsApp. I mean, it's so easy to fill up your phone with these messaging apps. And one trick I've always found helpful is after the conference, I immediately delete the app because I don't want to know if somebody's trying to contact me on WhatsApp or Kakao. Well, actually, I have to have Kakao Talk. It's the life in Korea, but WhatsApp is not there. You know, my Facebook Messenger is not there. I mean, I just don't have those messaging apps on my phone. I direct people towards email because that is something I have a process for, and it works, and it's stress free. But I think I would always tell people is wherever possible, just narrow down your communication channels. If somebody really wants to get in touch with you, they will find a way. Yes. You don't have to be available on all the messaging apps.
Exactly. I think sometimes as well, like when we're, you know, I was with a team in Paris doing some work, and I said, like, you know, if you look outside and you look at some of the monuments and the beautiful buildings and the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe, these things were built before there was WhatsApp and before there was email. So I think people were like, oh my God, like if people aren't responding right away to everything, nothing's going to get done. And I was like, we've, as a species, we've accomplished quite a lot before all of these things have sort of erupted into our lives. And I'm not to say, like, I use most of these apps that you talk about in some form or another. They give you tremendous benefits. I mean, and I think this is what we always talk about, especially in sort of in the world of make time, is like, try to figure out, like, what do you want from this tool? What do you want from this technology? And it's like, you're living abroad. I am as well here in Portugal, and the ability to pick up my phone and to FaceTime and to see my grandparents, my parents, my nephews, my niece, I mean, that is an absolute superpower. So like, I don't want to trade that away. But at the same time, you can open up your phone and you can go to the news, or you can open up social media. And then all of a sudden you're just confronted with just like so much a barrage of information that can be quite addicting, and you can lose a lot of time to it. And it's like, well, maybe I don't want that part of it. And so coming into this sort of more intentional relationship, and it's not easy because things are changing fast. And, you know, when I started doing this type of work, very, very, very few teams were using like, you know, a real-time messaging platform in their day-to-day. Most companies were primarily email meetings and
so
phone.
before they made the big mistake.
Yeah, now it's the reality, and it's like, you know, most the modern companies I work with are deep on Slack. That presents a lot of challenges, but also great opportunities. And then, you know, a lot of the companies I know, especially what happened, I think, is they moved in the pandemic to, you know, they took their old way of working and they just transplanted it into sort of a virtual hybrid form. And the challenges I see with, you know, with organizations with Slack or with Microsoft Teams or Google Chat, people feel so overwhelmed by it all, right? And I think you're right. It's like you gotta sit down and think, okay, with your team or just for yourself, like, what are the channels that I really want to use? How am I going to use those? And honestly, if most teams never have the conversation, so it's just kind of an informal, and everyone has their own approach. And so it's like I hear it all the time. It's like, you know, I got an email, I didn't reply to it because I was in a meeting, and then I got 3 chat messages, and then my phone was buzzing, and, you know, you're like, you know, people like the boundaries are so blurred between all of these, and it's like, okay, what's sort of the protocol, or how do we communicate? And you don't need to spend that much time up front to agree. And I think it's like when you're working on a project, you're going to an event, you can sit down and say, all right, what are the rules of the road? Like, how do we communicate? If people don't do that, it's a mistake, because then it becomes just this jumble and it's very overwhelming, instead of saying, all right, like, let's agree, let's think about, and also just to share boundaries. Because for me, I don't care personally if people that I'm working with, you know, try to get in touch with me on a weekend, if they try to call me, because it's up to me. So like, if you give me a call, you can send me emails, I don't care. You know, I work very non-traditional hours. I work for myself, so I move in and out of work and my life in a more fluid way. But for some people, they might say, look, like, I'm 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and like, it's blanket no from the office. And like, and having those conversations and setting boundaries is like, it's difficult work, but it's really worthwhile. And the ROI, the return on investment, is great if you spend some time up front doing it, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the initial step to becoming a little bit more intentional about how you're messaging and how you're communicating, there is a fear involved. It actually will be connected to the fear of missing out, but it's still the fear that they don't give it long enough. I think you've got to give it at least a month where you stick to the, as you mentioned, protocols that you follow, and people will start to respect I find people will respect your time way much more if you set some, I just call them my personal rules. You know, I personally do clear my inbox every morning, email, because, you know, meetings may have been cancelled. There might actually be a real emergency, and I don't want my brain to be thinking, you know, there's something there. I don't want that kind of distraction. So I just want to clear it. I never do email. I just clear it. And then at around about 4:30 in the afternoon, I'll sit down and give myself an hour to deal with communications. So I've got this 24-hour rule. I respond to email within 24 hours. It's stress-free. I just never feel stressed. It's, you know, 4:30, I'm, you know, creatively wise, I'm not there. Yeah, it's gone. I've used it all up in the morning. Now I can just deal with questions and deals with the basics of emails and messages, and then just go and have dinner. And it just works. But when I first started doing it, I was really scared. I had that fear. Somebody's going to be upset. Somebody's going to get angry. But the thing is, nobody ever did. And I still blows my mind that, you know, I might respond to somebody 20 hours after they sent me an email, for example, and they say, thank you for your quick reply. And that wasn't quick. So I think the state of email out there must be really bad if you're getting that kind of response. So setting boundaries, I think, is and some protocols is a really good way, but it's scary. I know it's scary.
Yeah, I think it's often like you said too, you know, you said, just having some rules. But I always think that, you know, it's like when you go to a party, and like, if, you know, maybe your friends invited you don't know everybody, so you sort of show up to the party, you're walking by the whoever's hosting, and you come in, there's a lot of people, they're walking around, and you get for me at least, I sometimes have that fear where I'm like, oh my God, people know I don't belong, or that I'm not, like, maybe they know that I don't know anybody here, and you kind of have this feeling, and then you realize, actually, most people are so self-absorbed and just so in their own world that they're not paying attention to you in the slightest. And I think that same sort of idea applies with sort of our email rules and our communication rules. It's like, generally speaking, most people are just kind of going through their day doing a million different things. And you think that, oh my God, if I do this a bit differently, if I change my way, that like everyone else is going to like really care or get upset. But often if you just sort of explain it, or you just give people a valid reason, scheduling the highlights. So we talk about this all the time, especially in big corporate, contexts where the days are filled. And we say, look, book an hour for yourself. And then, like you said earlier, the manager they try to, interrupt you, or another team tries to schedule. And I just tell people, just try to write back and say, Carl, thanks for including me in this meeting. Unfortunately, I have plans 9 to 10. Could we do it later in the afternoon? I see we're all available at 2. Or can we move it tomorrow? Or, hey, actually, I'm not sure I'm needed in this meeting. But if you just tell people, hey, I'm doing something else at this time. I actually already have some plans. Can we change this? My experience is 9 out of 10 times people are just like, sure. And you have it's this fear, right? You feel like, oh my God, like if I say I can't do this, or if I decline it, people are going to be freaking out. They're going to be thinking I'm not doing my job. But most of the time, people are just so busy in their own world. They're not even looking at your calendar. So they didn't see that you have an important work block. They scheduled the meeting, and then they kind of go back to their day. So often, like, we create these sort of boogeymen in our minds of how difficult it will be. And you're going to run into it. Sometimes you're going to run into the angry manager or the colleague who's pissed off that you didn't reply in an hour. That'll happen. But I think it's honestly outliers. Most of the time, you can kind of set your own rules.
But I've seen actually one of the best email response, an email signature actually that I think I got maybe a couple of months ago. I'm proud to say it was one of my clients as well, so I'm really proud of him for doing this. But what he did was at the bottom of his email, he says, I respond to email in 24 hours. If you need me before that, you can text me. I'll respond within 4 hours. And if it really is an emergency, you can call me. I thought, that's good. Because every time he sends that email out, he's reinforcing his rules to the people he's communicating with. And as I mentioned, people are amazing. They will respect your time, but they won't respect your time if you don't respect your time. And so if you tell people what your rules are, your protocols are, it's amazing what actually happens, because people will follow your lead. And it's, I was really proud of him for writing that. I thought, I might steal that idea.
I have something similar that I stole from somebody else in my email. That's basically at the bottom. It says something like, I usually take 2 days to read and 2 days to reply. And I write that and I tell people, look, I'm actually working against the culture of immediacy and like how it fractures my sense of time. So I put that in the bottom and I say, I don't have a specific thing, but I let people know, look, it might take me 2, might take me 4 days to reply to email. This is my personal, of course, with some of the clients I'm working with, I might just get an email and I say, oh, it's important. I'll reply the same day, same hour. But I think also just sharing that, and I've had quite a few people ask me to steal that. I said, sure, I actually I borrowed it from somebody else. And I think this is really it's really great. And I think people have to find their own rhythms. And some jobs, it's you and I are in more creative endeavors, and we're both writing, and we're both probably doing a lot of thinking and reading and creating. We need that. But of course, some people might be listening to this and they're a salesperson or there's someone that's doing something that's very external facing, and they might have a different need. The need of someone that's doing selling real estate is they might need to check their email on the hour every hour because it's about pace and quickness, and I think that's okay too, right? So it's take everything
it's creating your own protocols and rules so that they work for your situation. That's the important thing. Actually, you mentioned, I think I saw you mentioned in a video I saw of you, which is you talk about the one thing. What does that actually mean? The one thing? So I think you briefly mentioned it as we've been talking.
So I've alluded to it a few times, but one of the frameworks that has really inspired me and honestly changed my life, and that I feel really honored to teach, is this Make Time, based off a book on the same name, and we teach courses and workshops based off of this. And the core idea of Make Time is this idea of a highlight. The highlight is essentially like one big thing that you protect and prioritize in your day. And this has been transformative to me, because going back to my story that I shared at the beginning, I used to feel like I had to do 100 different things in a day. And I was just like constantly just reacting to the world around me, my to-do lists was, as a mile long. And I felt like at the end of those days, when I was just kind of getting through as much as I could, this sort of busy work, this administrative work, I didn't feel that great. It's just like, okay, you might do a lot of stuff, but like you're like, did I really kind of spend that time well? And I think this is where the difference between being sort of efficient and being effective comes into play. Because you can be really efficient. And honestly, I think that's where people and I used to also get in this trap of productivity, because productivity kind of denotes this feeling of efficiency. And it comes, that word really comes from this sort of industrial era mindset where it's like you're in the factory. It's like, how efficient can you produce widgets? And I think there's a time and a place for efficiency and productivity. But what I'm more interested in, and what comes back to the idea of one big thing, is more about being effective. And it's maybe less about doing 100 things that don't really matter, but putting your attention and your focus on one thing that is going to, make a difference for you. And that can be totally different depending on your personal context. And I think it's a very personal process of deciding, like, what at the end of the day is the question that we ask people. It's like sitting down tonight, and I look back on my day, what do I want to be the bright spot? And it might be, I want to just get, 500 words of the first, chapter of my new book, if you're writing it, right? It might be, I actually want to spend my energy and effort today planning some big family trip that I'm taking later this year, and that would leave me feeling good. But I think focusing yourself and having, the intention and the purpose of one thing is amazing, because at the end of the day, if everything else goes to shit, if you do have that thing that you really invested your energy and attention into, it feels really good. And if you just apply that day after day, whether it's a professional project, something in your work, in your career, and you're like, every day I'm going to put an hour, 90 minutes towards the book, or I'm going to put an hour to 90 minutes towards, this new career path I'm trying to work my way into, this new job. Or if it's something personal, I think you can just get such value out of having that intention and focus. So a lot of people have talked about this before. There's another book called, I think, the One Thing by Gary Keller.
From
Keller Williams, The Real Estate Empire. He talks about it in a slightly different way. Make time is kind of its own approach with sort of the daily highlight. And yeah, I think it's a really profound idea.
Because I know people will be thinking, saying, well, everything that comes at me every day is important. How do I prioritize? How do I choose what is the one thing out of this huge list of important things? The one thing I've always said to people, hang on a minute, if everything is important, then nothing's important. You've got to start learning. And I call it the art of prioritization, because it is an art. It's not a skill. It's an art that you need to learn. And to get better at an art, you need to practice. So it's a bit like, it's a muscle that you need to develop, the art of prioritization. But how do you help people when you're coaching them or teaching them to be able to identify what their one thing is going to be each day?
Yeah, I've changed, I'm always looking at that question in a different light. For me, lately, what feels most alive is helping people sense a bit more into their intuition. So, on a physiological level, we really have sort of these three brains. We have the brain that we're familiar with, but we also have, tens of millions of neurons in our gut, and millions and millions around our heart as well. We have inside of us an instinct and intuition and a gut feeling that I think is actually incredibly strong. I think what I fell into the trap of, and I still do, is I'm an overthinker. So like I could spend a lot of time trying to analyze exactly with my head, well, which of these tasks is going to be the one that really sets it apart, and thinking, and trying to kind of to strategize in that way. I think for some people that might be helpful. So some people, they might want to look and think, okay, what are the 10 things I have of these? Which one is going to, on a strategic or on a cognitive level, which one's going to bring the most value for the least amount of effort? And they might do something like that. For me, I'm much more into tuning in to like listening to what's in my body. And that might sound esoteric, but for me, it's quite simple. I have this time blocked every day in my calendar, but I'm not choosing my one thing weeks or months in advance. I'm usually choosing it the morning of. After I come back, I go for a morning walk, I get some fresh sunlight, and I come back, and I might just take a minute or two. I sit down, I might close my eyes, I might even journal a little bit, and I might just think, what's that thing that's calling for my attention? And if I just stop and I just listen, that thing usually arises, because sometimes it's something that feels like really exciting, and there's a creative energy, and it's like, ooh, that's the thing that I really want to dive into today. Sometimes there is something that is quite urgent. Maybe it's something that I'm a bit afraid of. I've been procrastinating on it for too long, and I know it's there. And I think, okay, I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to listen to that because if I can face that fear, that one thing that might be kind of chirping at you in the back, then I'm going to feel in a great way at the end of the day. So for me, I like to take a more intuitive process. And Make Time, we give people 3 strategies that are a bit more simple. We talk about urgency, satisfaction, and joy. So you might make your highlight something that is urgent. And it's like you wake up and you go, I have to file my taxes today, or, this is trouble. I need to fill this, my performance review for my colleague. Its deadline is today. Go ahead, make it your highlight. Don't put it off until the day's over and then you have to stay late. Just get it done. Satisfaction is like, what would leave you feeling satisfied? And I think that's a personal question, and that I think that one's interesting because the default for most people is to only deal with what's urgent. And the second question can help us think about, okay, not what's urgent, but maybe what's important to me. And then the third question too is joy. I think a lot of people, when it comes to productivity and time management, it's all about getting something done and like finishing something. And to me, there's a lot more to life than that. And so sometimes I might just ask myself, the highlight of my day, it might have nothing to do with a task or a project or anything related to my job. It might be, wow, I've got a friend in town and like my highlight is I've cleared 2 hours in the afternoon to go have a long walk in a park and catch up with them. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be productive. In fact, it means I'm actually probably going to be more productive in that morning because I want to make sure that I clear the decks before I head off at 2 o'clock. So it's just a practice. Like I said, like you said, the same thing with setting your communication channels. It might take, give yourself a month where you try to figure this stuff out. And this art of prioritization, it's a lifelong journey, and it's thinking, it's asking yourself these questions. I like Gary Keller's question, like, what's one thing I could do today that would make everything else, less urgent, or I wouldn't have to do it. So sometimes there's one task that if you do that, it opens up all these other things, or you can use that question of, I think Tim Ferriss shared that one, is just like, what's the thing that I'm most afraid of? And like, that might energize you. Or the questions I just shared about urgency, satisfaction, and joy. But I think most of us have the answer, the thing that really is calling for our attention, but we're sometimes just a bit afraid to listen to it. So I encourage people to tune in.
I like to think of it in terms of my non-negotiables, one of which is I have to take my dog for a walk every day. And that's an hour, and it's non-negotiable because, well, at 1:30 in the afternoon, he's tapping my leg saying it's walk time. So somewhere between 1:30 and 2:30, we have to go. So it's great because dogs are very habitual, and he is.
Yeah.
He will just tap you. He wakes up and sort of he's tapping me and getting my attention. It's time to go for a walk. But it's a non-negotiable. But for me, it's great because he does his thing, and I'm either walking by the beach, or I can go to the park, or I can go to the mountain. I mean, all 3 of these things are right close to me, so we can pick and choose one. And I'm out in nature, so it doesn't matter whether I've got a big project that has to be completed. Taking Louis for his walk is a non-negotiable part of the day. So I've got to figure out how much time I'm going to spend on the project because he's got to go for a walk. And I've got to do my exercise because that's another non-negotiable every day. That can vary what I do. Could be a run, it could be go upstairs into the gym. But either way, I still do it every day. So these sort of things are what I like to term my non-negotiables. That it's not micromanage the day. It's probably 4 hours out of 24 that I've got these non-negotiables. Another one, actually, when it comes to work, I'd always recommend people is having a non-negotiable 2-hour block somewhere in your day. Or in my case, I call it my creative time. But if somebody's in sales, it could be sales prospecting time, because I know from my own experience in sales, if you're doing the front end prospecting, the back end takes care of itself. So it's, the sales will start falling into place. But so you got to have a process. So it's part of the non-negotiable part of your day is that you need to spend X amount of time prospecting. Skip that, your sales will start falling. So it's a non-negotiable part of your day. But it doesn't mean that that's 10 hours that you have to fill your day with.
Yeah.
It's just 1 or 2 things that are just non-negotiable. I call it non-negotiable, but because then I can't talk my way out of it. It's not non-negotiable because of other people. It's here. It's this little voice that's saying, no, you're tired. You don't need to do that today. So, no, it's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
It's playing with the mind, but I know what you can do. If you don't get a good night's sleep or you ate the wrong kind of stuff and then you're for lunch, too much carbohydrates at lunchtime and you're going on it. If you tell yourself it's non-negotiable, you can't start finding excuses.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why I use that phrase. Just as we come towards the end, I actually have 2 more questions. Are there any daily or weekly practices that you would recommend somebody to follow that would help them to rethink their understanding of productivity so that they can do, as you suggested before, which is like slow down and focus more on the right things?
Yeah. There are a lot of things. I think one thing, just piggybacking off what you said, is I'd really encourage people to be proactive with scheduling breaks and some rest into their day. A non-negotiable for me. I can't function, and I don't think any human can function for 8 hours in a row without taking a rest. And so I really encourage people to think about, okay, what in my day are my moments when my energy is a bit down, and then thinking about proactively, like, what am I going to do? You have a great example, getting some physical movement, getting into nature, having some connection. You have an animal, maybe you're going on a walk with a friend. But I think it's really easy as our energy wanes throughout the day to then have this tunnel vision, and we get stuck in this productivity and efficiency trap of trying to get through as much as possible. But if you start to proactively say, okay, I'm gonna, after my morning work block, I'm gonna go for a quick 20-minute break, step outside. In the afternoon, I'll do that. It gives you just that moment to sort of pause, reflect, and think, okay, what do I want to do next? And I think that you just have to keep asking yourself day in, day out, what's the next most important thing? Like, where do I want to put my energy and attention? So I think that's really, really something that I encourage. I think the second thing is for people, as humans, we're social mammals, right? We're evolved from apes. Homo sapien is actually one of the 5 great ape species. So we can't forget that as social mammals, we're wired for connection with other people. And I really think it's important as people, when they want to change habits and they want to build different routines and they want to do something different than how they're living their lives today, is try to link up with somebody else. Maybe it's a friend, maybe you can hire a coach. Maybe you can just go to some of these. I go to a lot of these online co-working sessions with Flown, and there's another company called Focusmates. But I think getting out of this, we have this, I think, the society is getting more individualistic in many ways, different in Asia, of course, than in Europe and the US particularly. But I really encourage that, is to sort of seek out support and do things with other people. If you're having trouble going to the gym, like, make plans with a friend and go to the same class every week. That's really strong. And the third thing, which is, I think my overarching message, is just like, if you feel super busy and distracted and overwhelmed and stressed out, like, my firm belief is, like, this isn't an individual moral failing on your behalf. This is an issue with a larger system that we happen to live in. And I think if you look in the US, for example, and you look at obesity rates, and you start to see, wow, something like half of the country will be struggling with obesity in 20 years. You got to think, are half these people, is this an individual, like, moral failing, or is this a problem with the food system? Now, when you take that and you look at work and you look at the rate of mental health crises that people are facing, you look at burnout, 2/3 of workers reporting burnout symptoms last year. I think reminding people too that it's like, we're talking a lot about individual things you can do. Go for a walk, plan your focus break, change the way that you deal with your technology. These are all levers that you have an individual ability to affect. But if you're working in a company, or if you're in a culture that is constantly kind of pushing and pushing and pushing, and you feel tired and burnt out, it's like, give yourself a little bit of a break. So I always want to remind people of that, because I used to beat myself up endlessly if I wasn't living up to the perfect focus day. And if I felt too stressed and I got disorganized, or I couldn't deal with all the onslaught of messages. But we're living in just crazy times, and the technology we have is adapting at an exponential rate, and we don't have the ability, so as humans, to adapt at that pace. So I think if you're struggling, take some breaks, find some space for yourself, link up with other people, and also just remember, this isn't your fault. You can make some changes, absolutely, but just recognizing the context, I think, is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So this final question that we ask everybody on this show is, at Lifehack, we believe that life is nothing without the time to live it. What is one thing that you will regret if you're not investing enough time in it, and why?
I mean, your health, I think, for me, is the most obvious one, because your ability to enjoy life and to have experiences with other people, to move through the world, to feel good. If you're not investing in your health and not taking care of that, then I think everything else suffers downstream. So as you said, for me, it's non-negotiable, is doing something to move my body every day, making sure I get good sleep, trying to eat a balanced diet. I think these are the things that at the end of in 50 years, I think I'll be much happier that I decided to go for walks during my day and eat healthy. I'm not going to worry so much about those extra 5 emails I sent during the day. So I think, it's cliche, but I mean, health is the greatest wealth because your ability to enjoy anything in life is dependent on that. So I think that can't be overlooked.
You're right. I mean, it's weird, isn't it, that we'll spend all our careers earning money so that we can enjoy our retirement, but we spend our retirement inside hospitals. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, no, exercise so that you can enjoy retirement. You don't need a ton of cash to enjoy retirement, but you do need your health. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Connor. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
If you would like to learn more about strategies and practical skills to help you build customized skills to improve your management of time and get the most out of your day, then take a look at our Time to Act bundle. Everything you need to design a life you want to live is all neatly bundled together in this fantastic bundle. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in our next show.